Alright guys, welcome back to another round of digital notes. We are still on this unit titled Division because we're talking about the lead up to the Civil War and how the nation is dividing. The last notes that we took were on the North and like how life was in the North and things like that. Today we're going to be taking notes on the South. So if you haven't already, go ahead and open up your Google Doc notes that I posted on Google Classroom. It should be titled Division the North, and copy down your essential question. So the question that we're going to be looking at today is, what was life like in the South in the early 19th century? And why you should care about this. Basically, like I said, we're leading up to the Civil War, and we have the lifestyles in the North and the lifestyles in the South clashing. These lifestyles are clashing, and eventually this tension, this clashing leads to the Civil War, which is the deadliest conflict in American history. If at any point you need to pause to copy your notes down, feel free to do so. I'm going to continue on, so keep this video as short as possible. Okay, so like I said, today we're talking about the South. Okay, so like the North, the first category we're going to be talking about today for the South is geography. Southern geography, most of the South had this flat, swampy land, and this type of land made it perfect for farming. When America was first founded, it started with tobacco. Tobacco was grown all over the South. It was a very easy plant to grow. The climate was perfect for it, and it was very valuable. Eventually, tobacco was switched to cotton. So at this time, leading up to the Civil War, cotton is very valuable. It's a very easy plant to grow in the South. And so that's Southern geography. Moving on. Okay, so economics is the next category we're going to be talking about. Economics, if you don't remember, is basically how money is managed and like where the money is being placed. So in the South, the Southern economy was based around these large farms called plantations. The economy in the South was nicknamed the King Cotton economy because it was all based around this one crop, cotton. And the economy in the South was mostly operated on slave labor, which we know. So next we're going to talk about this thing called the Triangle Trade. It was called the Triangle Trade because it involved three different groups. You have North and South America as one group. You have Africa as the second group, and then you have Europe as the third. If we go back here, you can see the route that the trade took, basically. Okay, so you have gold that came from North and South America. Very valuable at the time. We have slaves that came from Africa. And from Europe, we have finished goods. So like anything that needs production, so like tools, furniture, things like that. Okay, so this next thing, I'm going to play an audio track. I just want you to visualize what's happening. Try to imagine what is happening in the scene that I'm about to play. Okay, you don't have to do anything on your notes here. I just want you to listen to the scene. The scene is basically slaves being shipped from Africa to the Americas.
Dios te bendice, hija. Dios te bendice. Dios os perdona y os ama a todos. Ala, ala, que Dios os perdone.
So, we're talking about the triangle trade. The passage from Africa to America was called the Middle Passage. And slaves traveled the Middle Passage in these very cramped, deadly conditions. And the reason that they were packed in like this, it was purely economic. They were treated as property or as cargo. They wanted to get as many slaves to America at the lowest cost possible, and packing them in like this was the most cost effective. And then once they got there, many of them would be sold in public auction. I'm going to show a couple pictures here. So this is just a picture of a ship and how its cargo hold would have been laid out with slaves filling it. You can see how packed in they are here, and you can see how closely they are to each other. There's no room to move. And I'm going to show this here. This shows they're literally chained to the boards in the ship. So you can't move. You can't go to the bathroom. Like that's however long it takes to get from Africa to America. That you're chained to the deck. You cannot move. If you'd like to pause here, I'll let you read these ads. These are ads advertising the sale of slaves. I'm not going to stay on this. If you want to read through these, you can. Feel free to pause. I'm going to move on. Okay, so the next category we're talking about today is society, Southern society. Southern society was based around this thing called the plantation, basically a large farm. Now, the reason plantations evolved was because of this invention called cotton gin. And we learned about this in the video that we watched a couple weeks ago. So the cotton gin was designed to lower the need for workers on a farm. Harvesting cotton, there are seeds in the cotton, and you can't process the cotton unless those seeds are removed. And before the cotton gin, you had to do this by hand, and it took quite a long time. So the cotton gin basically made it so that one person could remove the seeds from this cotton very easily just by running it through this machine here. So it was designed to lower the need for workers on the cotton farm. It did not do that. It did the exact opposite. Because cotton was so valuable, and because cotton was able to be processed at a much faster rate, it just made these plantation owners want to grow more cotton so that they could make more money. I'm going to show you a graph here. So the cotton gin was invented in 1794. If you look at this graph, you can see, look at the number of slaves in the U.S. Look at how it jumps up after the cotton gin was invented. And remember, it was meant to reduce the amount of workers needed, and instead, just because the plantation owners were greedy and wanted more money, it increased the need for slaves. So the cotton gin was invented by this man named Eli Whitney in 1794. In 1794, we had about 500,000 slaves. And so in 1794, this greatly increased the demand, and it just kept going up and up and up until around the time we're talking about, we had 3 million slaves in the South. And like I talked about, slaves were treated like property. So think about like how you treat your things. They were treated like property. They had no rights of any kind. If they were not listening, beatings and whippings were common to make sure that you did listen. What you're looking at here is a common slave house. They lived in these really small plain houses. Usually they're very far away from the plantation house because the plantation owners did not want to associate themselves with the slaves. Now we're going to talk about the resistance. Who was involved in helping the slaves. So some slaves tried to run away. A lot of them tried to run to the north and specifically to Canada. Slave owners hired these slave hunters to track down their runaway slaves, and they offered significant rewards for their return. And I've got an ad in the newspaper, $150 reward for a runaway slave. $150 is a lot nowadays, so like consider how much that is back then. Later on, laws even made it illegal to help runaway slaves. So even if you were in the North where slavery was outlawed, or you were in a state that had no slaves, it was illegal to help those slaves that had run away from the South to the North. And if you were caught helping them, you could go to jail as well. Most of you guys have heard of the Underground Railroad. This was not an actual railroad. It was basically a series of safe houses starting in the South and going all the way up to Canada. That their goal was to help slaves escape to the North. They used these secret symbols to indicate that like a place was safe for the slaves to go to, because when you're running to the North, you don't necessarily have a map to go by, but if you know these secret symbols, like certain lights being on in a house, you know that that's a safe house, that the house will welcome slaves and hide you, like certain lights being on like that. So the Underground Railroad was responsible for helping over 100,000 slaves escape to Canada. The last thing I want to talk about today is Nat Turner's rebellion. Okay. Nat Turner was this slave who got together a group of slaves, and they basically rebelled, and they killed around 60 different slave owners in Virginia. This was very scary for the South at the time, because there are so many more slaves than there are free men in the South, that if the slaves were ever to gather and like in mass and actually rebel, there was not a whole lot that the free men could do about it. So this led to very extreme fear, and that fear led to an extreme retaliation. And so to make sure that this didn't happen again, a lot of slaves, any slaves that were even tangentially involved in this rebellion, they were executed. And it also led to these really extreme laws saying that, like, if you're a slave, or even if you're a free black man in the South, you're not allowed to be educated. You're not allowed to assemble in a group of larger than like 3 people. You're not allowed to go to church. You're not allowed to have meetings. This rebellion led to those laws. We're going to stop there for today. Thanks for joining me, guys.